In this video, I want to introduce the concept of functions and specifically the use of functions in MATLAB. We've previously looked at scripts, such as this one, and we know that they operate with a set of defined instructions and that they have a set purpose, but there's no input and output facilities compared to functions that we've used provided by MATLAB, such as sum. So this has input x and output s, whereas a script, on the other hand, is just a explicit set of instructions. So to get from an explicit set of instructions to a nice script with defined input and output, we want to introduce the concept of a function. Now the function is it's an idea born from modular programming, which is the concept of breaking down a bigger problem into smaller steps, and this will be introduced in lectures. But the idea is, you can have a problem with step 1, step 2, so on, and you can introduce a function f1 and f2 to accomplish each task. And so that's what we want to eventually reach. So we can break down a big problem into smaller problems, which are a lot easier to solve and accomplished by functions which we've written. Before we tackle a problem of constructing a function, I just want to introduce a few concepts based behind modular programming. And in MATLAB, a function, instead of using the default workspace, so if I run a script, we see that the workspace, which is the default MATLAB workspace, is populated with some variables. This is a characteristic of scripts, and a characteristic of functions is that functions have their own private workspace. Okay? The concept of a private workspace, I guess, can graphically be represented as a black box. So, with each one of these, if we consider the MATLAB memory, so our computer's allocated some memory to MATLAB, and all of it's inside this red box. And the red box is the default workspace. And within that, when we run our scripts and when we use MATLAB as a command line calculator, it assigns bits of memory. But on the other hand, we have functions. Functions are essentially black boxes in which, to the outside world, we don't exactly know what's happening. All we know is that there's some input and that there's some output. And as by example, I looked at sum before, the input and output is well defined. So this is the input and that's the output. And that's similar to what is going on here. So we have a main workspace, and there's some input coming in and there's output coming out, and that's all we're concerned about. The inner workings of this function are exclusively disguised in a private workspace, which is effectively a black box to the outside world. This is useful because it stops interference in variables. What I mean by that is, if we have a script here, I can actually change the variables associated with the script, and changing false from a vector to this number completely destroys and pollutes the script and what the variables mean. And with a function, we don't have this problem. We hide away our variables inside a nice black box like this, and so the only things we're concerned about is some input and the output, which we pass from function to function in a nice function like this. So the concept of workspace is something you'll get used to. That is, functions have private workspace, where they hide their variables from the outside world. This will be more clear when we do an example. Just another distinction I should make is that functions, unlike scripts, have facility for help. What I mean by that is, a function, again, the example of sum, or if I use, max, this is the function, but it has a help file associated with it. We can actually write our own help files for our own functions. So we can package up our functions, send them to other programmers, and they themselves can look at our function, read the help file, and get a feeling of what is happening, which you can't get from a script. Okay, so there's really not too much difference between functions and scripts in terms of the way they're constructed. The main difference that we will come to see is that we purely just have to define a function in terms of, as I said, if we look at the example of sum, we need to define it in terms of the input x and the output, which in this case is s. So let's tackle an example and let's convert this script to a function, and that's what the next video is going to look at.